Ken and Daren, this is so exciting. I had a moment the other day where I was like,
Good morning.
the CTO of a company is going to show up on my conference. Like, Microsoft would never do that. That that doesn't happen in the real world. I'm on cloud nine here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Ken, are you driving the deck that we're using?
Yeah, let me get that going real quick.
Wait for Ken to bring this up here. So Ken's my partner in crime here. Ken will be, I'll be talking about kind of some high level concepts and kind of how this has been architected. And Ken will roll up his sleeves and hopefully and get to some real meat and show you.
Okay. So I guess we can start here.
Yeah. So getting out of the Domo UI. So administering and extending Domo with APIs. So I have always stressed the importance of Domo being an open platform. And one key element of Domo being an open platform is that the platform can be both extended and managed via APIs. And at Domo, we have a remarkably talented team of product managers, designers, developers, QA, and they're always hard at work extending the Domo platform. But providing an open platform, one of the huge values to provide an open platform is that we also enable a far greater number of talented and innovative people to do things with Domo that we never even thought of doing. And I love seeing some of the creative solutions and integrations that our customers create on their own, often using the Domo APIs. Let's go to the next slide, Ken. So seasoned software engineers understand this concept that we're just kind of quickly showing here on this slide. They understand this concept very well. But if you're just starting your journey into automating or extending a platform like Domo, this may not be completely obvious or intuitive. But as you interact with Domo in your browser, there are a stream of API calls that your browser is making under the covers. And if your browser is able to make an API call, then that means it's a publicly available API, an API that can be invoked from literally anywhere in the world. That's where browsers live, of course. And so if a browser can call an API, then so can you. And here in these screenshots, you can see this is using the Chrome inspect object panel, where you open it up and you can kind of see under the covers. You can start to see under the covers what your browser is actually doing as you're interacting with something like Domo. So if you're curious about a specific API, one thing that's always available to you is you can just start using Domo in a browser and you can see what API calls are being made. But of course, now I'll talk more about this because this is certainly a somewhat advanced topic. That version of looking at APIs is certainly a somewhat advanced topic. So let's go to the next slide, Ken. So there are three major tiers that make up what I'm calling the API framework. And these major tiers are just listed here, and they're listed in order of complexity, with the least complex, the Domo CLI, at the top. And in fact, there's also a hierarchy here because the Domo CLI is built entirely upon the SDKs. The SDKs are built entirely upon the APIs. So that's the hierarchy that exists here. You move down the chain. So let's dig into these a little bit further. Ken, let's move to the next slide. So public APIs. So there's I mentioned public APIs, and I'll further differentiate, and I'll say uppercase P public versus lowercase p public is kind of how I'll talk about them. So all of them are public APIs, meaning they can be called from anywhere in the world, and they're APIs that your browser is using and under the covers all the time. So these set of APIs can be broken down into those two. Fully documented and supported is the uppercase P, and they are documented at developer.domo.com. And then those that are not documented are the lowercase p. And like I said, you are able to use both because your browser is using them, and so anybody can call those. But as you can imagine, it's more challenging to use the undocumented APIs simply because they're not documented, but also using them introduces a level of risk since there's no guarantee the undocumented APIs may change without notice. And And that's where the next level comes down, the value of the SDKs. So the SDKs, as I mentioned, are built entirely up on top of the Domo public APIs, and they largely make use of the lowercase public P APIs. So when you use the SDKs, you don't really have to, one advantage, you don't have to really know anything about dealing with RESTful API calls. You know, like the concept of dealing with a RESTful call is completely abstracted in the SDKs, and you don't have to know anything about that. But another benefit is that if you build using one of the SDKs, if there's an underlying Domo API change that is being wrapped by our SDKs, then we will own the responsibility of updating that SDK to handle that API change. And so you get abstracted also from that risk somewhat. In most cases, your code won't have to change at all. If there's an API change that requires code to change, you know, we'll change the SDK to handle that, and then you would simply download the latest version of the SDK to handle that. And in reality, there actually are very few API changes that require that the SDK be updated. It's really not that common for APIs to change in a way that would break code. That's not that common. But building on top of the SDK brings you both the more simplified model for how to deal with Domo APIs, and it provides this layer of protection against changes. Then further up the food chain from the SDKs is the CLI, and you've probably already either had experience with the CLI, or you've seen references to it in other sessions in this conference. The CLI tends to be used heavily, I'd say, in advanced data pipelines, but there are more uses for sure than data pipelines that are covered by the CLI, and Ken will show you some of these examples. But again, the CLI is built on top of the SDKs, and using the CLI is even easier than using SDKs, because it's just evoking command line, and you can use a variety of scripting tools to build a script that involves a CLI. Let's go. I think the next slide. I think we're kicking over to you, Ken. Right? Yeah. So let's jump into this. Right. Let's roll up the sleeves. Enough of me just kind of talking about high level. Let's see this in action.
All right. Thanks, Daren. Yeah. So some of the things that we've done, seen customers do, is you know, around connectors. They want to be able to make a duplicate of a connector and then adjust the connector properties. We have clients that have written scripts to do that. We have clients that manage 50,000 or more connectors. So you can imagine going into the user interface and adjusting something 50,000 times is just not feasible. And so we are able to create you know, scripts that can do that. You know, we've had a lot of people go through and they look at the data center, and we have got data set tags, and it's like, okay, now I have 1,000 data sets and I need to add tags to each of these data sets. That's another easy place to go in and add some automation, where you can adjust those data set tags so that you can go back and use the filtering mechanism to actually see your different data sets in groups. You know, if you want to be able to copy cards, we've got APIs to do that. So you can move cards around from one dashboard to another, or one page. You might create a page and then you want to promote that page to another region. So you want to duplicate that page. And there is functionality within the UI now to do that, but you can also do it programmatically. And then a big piece is data pipeline. So if you want to leverage upsert or partitions or multi-part upload, those are when you want to step into the SDK and the CLI to be able to define your upsert keys, so that when you ingest data, the Domo ingestion engine automatically takes care of the data reconciliation for you. Or you might be loading, again, for data reconciliation, you want to load on partition boundaries, which might be daily or might be regional, where, you know, every 3 days or every 30 days, you want to upload new data and you want that to get reconciled. And you can do that through a partition. And the CLI and the SDK allow you to basically tag the data through those partitioning values. And also through the CLI is the ability, if you're using upsert, where you might want to go in and surgically remove some rows, where partitioning is for bulk actions. Upsert, you can actually manipulate a single row. And then what I want to do is jump over to a second. over to the dojo. Let me share that one. So I've added quite a bit of stuff here for you guys to reference. And to Daren's point, all of these tools are built upon, each other. So the CLI is a text-based tool that allows you to do certain commands. You can script those. The SDK allows you to, you have to write some code, in your favorite and development environment. And then if you want to, go out to the developer portal, there's stuff out there too that is wrapped. From the development portal, if you go out and see that, there's documentation around accounts and data sets and groups, pages, projects and tasks, streams and users. At the SDK level, we have managers to do that. So when you actually start writing code, you've got an admin manager or an authentication manager, data flow manager. And these managers, as Daren alluded to, is they wrap that API so that you're talking about an object rather than having to know the full payload of the RESTful API. And then we've got some examples here where, this is an example of needing to be able to remove some GDPR data from existing data sets. So the code here will go through and query a Domo data set, extracting the data that needs to be removed, and then re-uploading that data back to the data set itself, so that you can actually take John Smith out of the data so that it is in compliance. Some of the other things you can do is you can do dynamic queries against your data set. So you build up, the actual query object. So if you're thinking SQL, where you'd create your where statement, this is where within code you would actually code a where statement by putting values into these different objects that get passed in, and then it returns back the smaller subset of data if you need to do that. On the CLI, this is just something, I actually had to do this last night. I want to touch upon this one. See if I can get this to go full screen. So last night I was creating a data flow, a Magic 2.0 data flow, and I got to the point where I needed to change state codes to US state names, and there's 50 states, and it's like, okay, so I can go into the user interface and I can say, AL equals Alabama, and OR equals Oregon, and CA equals California. And after the third one, I was like, my eyes went crossed, and like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to do this for everyone because I have to copy paste or type it in, and it's pretty onerous. So what I was able to do, because I know these tools, is I used the CLI tool to connect to my instance using a simple command of connect with the domain, a username and password. And then I did a list data flow, and I got the ID of the data flow I needed. And I got the data flow definition file as a JSON text file onto my hard drive. And this picture highlights where I had created 4 filters in the transform. I find that section, I copied it, I took it over to Excel, I pasted it into Excel, created a column for state code, state name, and then I broke up the different pieces to be able to use the string concat function to recreate the needed values that go into this transform. And so then I was able to copy that, the resulting effect of that, this last column had the strings I needed. I copy those, I paste them back into this highlighted section, replacing 4 filters into 50 filters. And then I run the set data flow properties command using that new updated definition file. Once that completed, I went back in, refreshed my ETL, and I had all 50 states added as a filter. That took probably a third the amount of time for me than it would have for me to type in and choose the column, choose the code, and choose the name for each one of these. So that's just a simple explanation of going through some automation of a tedious task, and then just turning it into something that is less onerous on you. And then ironically, I ended up doing this 3 more times because I had product codes and brand codes that I had to do, and those lists were between 35 and 75. And so, once I did this once, it was really easy to go back in and edit my ETL and build out very robust filtering mechanisms without having to go in and click multiple times and take up even more time. So that was just something that I had to do last night. But there are other examples out here about.
I would say, by the way, Ken, I would say,
yeah.
when you it's cool to see that kind of example where you're taking the JSON representation of an object and you're modifying it, and then you're pushing it back. Always save the original one.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
in case the change you made is not necessarily what you intended to, so you can push back the original one.
Yeah, 100%. And data flows do have versioning now, so we do protect ourselves from within the product as well. So some other examples here. This was an example of appending, running 8 data sets that do backfill, and then appending that data to a master data set. And so, rather than, this was an easy way of just saying, I need to take historical data and I want to move it into my regular data. And then I have my historical backfill added in to my main data set. And another thing that comes up often and I want to touch upon is, the CLI tool is a command line interface. So you type in a command, you wait for that, and it's very synchronous. You wait for that command to complete, you would do the next command. If it has an output, you have to copy it and do some other things. So it is very manual. But the CLI tool can be run headless. And to do that, you invoke the CLI tool with a script command. And then that script is simply just each one of those synchronous commands that you would do, that you would be typing in. So if this is a data pipeline, you would connect, you would upload data, and then disconnect, and those 3 data sets would then be uploaded. And so this can be run on a cron, it can be run off of a trigger, and it can be, and then it basically you develop a script that can then be run, and you don't ever have to touch it again. And let's see, back to the SDK. I wanted to touch upon this on the Domo APIs. There are a couple examples out here also of, we have an extremely fast export mechanism now in Domo. And this document will walk you through using the raw API to export your data from Domo out to an S3 bucket. Jay and I were just doing this a couple weeks ago, where we were using an older mechanism and we were getting timeouts and file size problems. And this mechanism is super fast if you need to get large amounts of data out of Domo. And it goes through and explains, and it's the raw stuff. So some of this stuff can be a little scary to look at, but this is the raw API that you would call from Postman or from Python or from your code, and that's available out there. And then another example of that is, you can use the CLI tool to get a card on a page. You can use the Java SDK and write code, and use the resource manager to get a card on a page. And this is an example of if you wanted to use Postman or write some Python code, that this would also do the same thing. So all 3 levels, depending on where you're comfortable. And this shows that it's a get, HTTP get with the appropriate endpoint call, authentication header, and then the body. This is the results that would come back from a get. I guess, Jay, we got time for questions.
Yeah. Could you circle back to that access token, the example you were just showing
Sure.
Yeah. So I remember getting tripped up by this when I was getting started, and I still get tripped up by this There's two different authentication methods, right? There's one with the client ID and
Yes.
secret, and there's one with this
Yes.
developer token. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so if you go to developer.domo.com, that's our public uppercase P area for APIs, and out there we use OAuth, and so you will create a token, a secret and a customer token, and it's scoped. So you can say, I only want to read from data or write to users. So it has this robust mechanism to be able to authenticate within scopes. And that works for all of the APIs that go through api.domo.com off of developer.domo.com. When you move into the next level of the SDK or the CLI, it uses username auth or it uses token auth. And to do that, you go to the administration section of Domo, and within the administration section is security, and in security, the first item is access tokens. And this grants you an access token that can be used on the API calls. And so if you're doing a Postman call or a Python call, you need to pass this Domo developer token in your header with that access token, which is the token you get. It's an access token from the admin security section, not the developer.domo.com token. And so that you do need to make sure you know which world you're running in. You can do you can do some of the developer.domo.com API calls, and then you can do raw calls, like this. They interoperate this, the same way, but that does take a different authentication method. And this token also is passed. You can use it as a -T to authenticate in the CLI, and you use it as authentication or token authentication within the SDK when you're writing the Java code as well, or the .NET code.
In my head, if the URL of the API starts with api.domo.com, then I'm using client ID and secret. Whereas if it's mydomain.domo.com, then I'm using developer token. Is that true?
Yes, that's a safe assumption. Yeah.
Okay. One or two questions did come in. They were asking if there's a command in the CLI that would allow you to alter dashboards.
That's a fairly vague question, but yes, there are commands in there to modify cards, copy pages. If you get the CLI is available through the download section in the admin. So if you go to the admin section of your Domo instance, go to the tools downloads, you can get the latest version of the CLI tool. The first thing I would do is I would type help. I'm going to go through that out here.
I'll go through that in mine.
I didn't put a whole list in here, but if you type help, and if it'll output the entire list of all of the commands with their parameters and the different values that you can pass to it. So we keep that up to date, and it's very robust.
And the functionality is being added all the time. They're adding new commands or modifications to commands. So it is worth your time to check what version of the CLI you currently have, and then go into the download section and make sure you're on the most recent one, because they are constantly adding new stuff. The only thing I really don't know from the how would I is how would I set up a connector? Like, which of these methods would help me if I have like 50 connectors that I need to set up?
Connectors right now, you have to go to the lowercase p APIs.
So I would have to like sniff network traffic.
Yeah, and I was going to put an example in, but it gets pretty complicated pretty quick. We're more than happy to kind of walk people through that. Each connector has a properties section, and each one of those is unique to that connector. So there's only a handful. Like I just recently did this where I have a script that will update the properties of a connector, and you can update the update mechanism, whether it's a replace or an append. You can you can update the schedule. And then there's like the name. Those are like the 5 basic things of a connector that are guaranteed. Every connector has those objects. Then it has its own metadata properties section, where you have to kind of sniff the network traffic and understand the payload and kind of reverse engineer that. And so I did that for some Square connectors. And we also did it for, I had a client that needed it for Clavis. And so I put some very specific code in for Clavis, and then I needed to do some stuff with Square. And like I said, I found those 5 areas that were the same across both connectors. And then I have very specific property manipulation for Clavis and very specific manipulation for Square. So that like, I have an infrastructure that would work if you wanted to go to Google or go to Facebook or something else, but there's definitely a section where it's like, you have to roll your own in that area because each connector has its own little, property. So we've looked at it a couple of times, and because it's so dynamic, there's just no great generic way to do the connectors. And so it's kind of a case by case basis.
Dream of dreams, it would be amazing if when I go like select a web connector and I can like, I can build the connector in Domo. It would be super cool if it was like, here's a sample API request that we could use to like decide if we wanted to kind of like you're saying, create our own connector, because surely the folks developing connectors have that documentation it must exist somewhere.
Well,
anyway,
and every connector is just unique to what it's connecting to. And that's why we have to have over 1,000 of them, because every one of them is so unique.
Yeah. Well, guys, I've really appreciated you coming in and making the time to come talk to us. This has been one of the sessions that I've been looking forward to the longest, because this is certainly an area that I personally struggle with and I'm looking to expand my skills on. So again, thank you for taking the time. In our last 2 minutes, are there any thoughts or inspiration that you want to share with the folks?
I would say, like I talked at the beginning, there are so many innovative people around the world, and I love seeing really cool creative solutions that people automate or script using Domo APIs. And also, that comment of kind of sniffing the network to kind of see what an API is doing, that's always available. But also, often a simple request made into support can get routed to somebody who can answer a question about those APIs too. I mean, they're not fully supported, documented, et cetera, but we've got a team of people who are always eager to help our customers do really cool things.
Yeah, you were making the comment that more and more, as we start submitting more technical questions to support@domo.com, sometimes a Ken Boyer or someone like Ken Boyer is actually secretly behind the strings answering that question.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, guys, I think I just wanted to make a point of saying that, because I remember my experience getting started. It felt like it took forever to get my question in front of the right person. And I was trying to like find workarounds to get to Ken faster functionally. But, in the last year, I've definitely noticed that even though my question is going through support, which it's supposed to do, we're getting that feedback from the labs team or the connectors team and whatnot. So
yeah, we're always trying to enhance and optimize that experience where support knows where something needs to get routed inside of Domo, which is kind of an ever-changing thing inside of Domo. But the best interface for customers is support, and then trust that it'll get routed the right place.
Wicked. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you taking the time.